Still got everyone beaming in, which is good. Right, so we have item 9, which is implementing the Auckland Urban Ngāhere strategy, the update for July. Cool. So if you could just, Mark, Howell and Mace, if you just introduce yourselves as you go for the people at home. Thank you.
Kia ora mātātou, kia ora Mr Chairman and members. We will run through a presentation with you, but I'll do a short introduction and then hand over to Mark Bowater as Head of Park Services, and we have Hal Davies here as our Urban Ngāhere specialist as well, and people behind us who have contributed to this strategy and the implementation. So the strategy provides a vision and success factors along with a number of objectives over a time frame. Our role today is to report back to you on the progress that's being made around the key high-level actions of knowing, growing and protecting our urban Ngāhere across the city, across Tamaki Makaurau. We're in the early part of that program, and we've gained some important benchmark information which shows progress of maintaining the urban Ngāhere and where we have some challenges and where priorities will be set in terms of the spatial distribution of our urban forest, urban Ngāhere. And that does mean to say in the future we'll take quite an area-based specific approach. As was mentioned in the last item to the committee, Mr Chairman, there are some equity issues, those in terms of canopy coverage, and we do have some lower canopy coverage for our urban forest Ngāhere in the southern part of the region. So we have, local boards of Papakura, Otara, Papatoetoe, Mangakiki, Tamaki, Mangere Otahu and Manurewa that have quite low levels of canopy coverage, and we'll show you that in the presentation. Finally, I would just like to acknowledge the Mayor and the Chair's advocacy with central government and looking at what our other regulatory levers might be to achieve our urban Ngāhere coverage, and particularly maintenance of those larger trees. Whilst Dr Barton talked about the limitations of the LiDAR survey work, we do have other methodologies that allow us to get a good understanding of what the canopy coverage is, and particularly of those larger trees in the 20 to 30 metre range. Lastly, there's been significant local board engagement and really a high level of support for this program. And in terms of implementing the strategy and understanding what is in each local board area and how we can contribute to improving the health and well-being of our strategy. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark, Mr Chairman. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Mark Bowater, Head of Park Services, and this is Hal Davies, Senior Urban Forest Advisor who's leading the program. So I just want to acknowledge that this is a multi-departmental approach and we're coordinating. We have support from colleagues behind us if required. So we're here today for two primary purposes. One, to give you as a committee an update on progress on the Urban Ngāhere strategy, and also to seek support in principle for the preparation of a business case that will explore options about how to accelerate implementation of the strategy that could be considered through the long-term plan process. So just as a recap, the Urban Ngāhere strategy was approved in February 2018 and released a year later. It has a primary vision which is focused on a healthy, diverse, flourishing urban Ngāhere and green infrastructure network, bringing significant benefits to the city. It has three key outcome areas, and we will talk about progress against each of those outcome areas: knowing, growing and protecting. It has two primary mechanisms, which are engage and manage, and it is supported by 9 principles. So we'll go through each of those key outcome areas. The first one is knowing. And this is all about knowing actually what we've got in terms of the urban Ngāhere. One of the primary ways to do that is to map it. And this is our LiDAR, light detection ranging tool. And so we'll talk you through what the LiDAR results are telling us, what it looks like across the region, where there are disparities, how that's arised. One of the other key actions we've been through is developing a regional database for our tree assets. So all of Council's street and park tree assets are captured into a database. And we know that we've got over 500,000 trees captured into that database. We're also doing some work on qualifying the values and benefits of the urban Ngāhere. We're looking at survival rates of what we plant and trying to work out some key performance measures around that. And we're working very closely with local boards, and there are 12 local boards that we're engaged with at the moment to understand better in their area what's happening with urban Ngāhere. So I'll ask Hal to talk a little bit more about the LiDAR analysis and what it's telling us. There was some reference to this morning. So it is important that we understand the principles of what's happening across the region.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Howell Davis, Urban Forest Advisor with Parks. So the map that you see up on the screen is from the 2013 LiDAR, which shows predominantly all of the areas are in red where the canopy cover is less than 10%. Obviously the main areas that we can see are in the south, and from the most recent LiDAR information that we've gathered, although there is a positive net increase across the overall region of 0.1%, we're also seeing that there are now increased or negative losses continuing in the Otara, Papatoe area, in Howick and Hibiscus and Bays. Some of the larger net gains that we see are in Devonport and Takapuna and Albert Eden. One of the things that we're noting, and this is still very early days in terms of the analysis of the data, is that we are noticing that there is a continuing trend, and that continuing trend tends to be showing that we're seeing losses of the larger trees across the region. Further work is planned in this area. LiDAR, because of its complexity, has an awful lot of information that we need to drill into, and we will have further information to report back within the next few months on further findings. So if we look at it in a little bit more of a finer scale, here we can see that less than 1% of our tree canopy cover is over 30 metres in height, and as was pointed out this morning by Mel's, that a majority of our tree canopy sits in that 10-metre range, and so that's 75% of our trees are within that height category. The other important point to note is that, again, the larger trees, we have less than 5% of trees greater than 20 metres in height. One of the other key points to recognise here is that the majority of ownership of trees is on private property. And so the land that's owned by the council, public open spaces, etc., we've seen a net increase in the overall tree cover in these areas, whereas we've seen a net decrease in the losses across the private land areas. Obviously, whether there are some issues around removal of tree protection may relate to that, but as yet the trajectory or the trend that we're seeing is not really sufficient that we can come up with a definite conclusion on that. So if we go
I'll just also clarify, one of the primary outcomes from the strategy is for urban tree canopy cover across the region to be at 30%. This was a target that was set. So when we talk about the degree of coverage by local board area, 15% was seen as a minimum threshold, and we still have local board areas that are not achieving that. So that's when we talk about the geographic disparity. We have a target of 30%, we have a minimum threshold of 15%, and we still haven't quite achieved that with every area.
So again, if we look at these two images here, these are showing the net increases and the net losses. Importantly, to recognise that again, that we can see that there is still an ongoing net trend towards loss in the south. And again, you can see that in the northern area, specifically around the Hibiscus and Bays, you can see that again that there's a decrease. Some of these are obviously related to development. Some of it will be brownfield and greenfield-based development, along with infill housing. But obviously that trajectory, as we see, is something that is of concern in terms of the ongoing losses of trees in an area, especially in the south, where the tree cover is already recognised as being reasonably low. So when we start to look at what does that actually look like, so this is giving you a little bit of an insight into the QA of what LiDAR looks like. So these images show the vegetation cover. So the 3 images across the top show the vegetation cover, and then the 2 images down below obviously show the aerial photography around that. So basically the areas of red that we can see show where net canopy loss has taken place, and the areas that we can see in blue in the bottom right-hand area of the photograph shows where there's been net increases. And so looking at the image in the center there from 2017, you can see there's a new development going on. And interestingly, just below the road, that's an established area of residential where we can see now that the canopy cover is increasing. And so this kind of gives us, I guess, a bit more of a granular scale around what the LiDAR is actually showing us, and gives us a reasonably good level of accuracy and gives us a good level of confidence in terms of the results that we're reporting back to you. So as I said, though, further work is underway to now determine the actual classification of the scale and the sizes of the trees that we're losing or gaining within the various height categories. That work was done in 2013. That work is yet to be done for 2016-17.
This is also the first time we've had this level of detail, so it's highly accurate, and we're now able to quantify quite accurately what's happening down to a local board level. So another part of building that picture is the trees that the council manages, street and park trees. And we've built an app called the BioTree app, which captures and records every tree movement. And we've had this in place for a couple of years. So we're building quite a detailed picture of what we've got, what's happening to our urban ngahere, our tree asset that the council is managing, and working out how we can influence that further as we go forward.
It's also important to recognise that this is one of the high-level objectives that was in the knowing phase, was for council when we started on this process of developing the urban ngahere strategy. There wasn't one coordinated place that we were able to capture all of our tree planting information across the organisation and the council family. So through the development of this now enables us to capture all of our areas of business where we're creating new green assets. It also enables us to track our performance around how we look after them. Also enables us to show the actual area that we've planted across the entire region. So the image on the left is of the local street tree asset. And so those are the brown trees are street trees and the green are in park trees. And the image on the right is from our regional database, and so it's a 2-stage database that shows both local and regional tree numbers. And so the one on the right, as you can see, that this is going back to 2000, and so we've had very limited records kept on what we've planted over the last few years, though we've become a lot more efficient at that. And this app now enables us to capture this data actually in the field using handheld devices, and we can locate them spatially as well. So a positive, as you can see there, over that period, we've planted, or an area planted of 988 hectares in our regional park space. So when we talk about our growing outcomes, as Mark has already mentioned, we're working with our local boards. In 2019, we produced 11 analysis reports for local boards based on the 2013 information to give them a very fine-grained scale of what their tree cover was like in their local board area. From that piece of work, the same 12 local boards have continued to support the programme. And so now this year we're developing up basically a growing plan for each of those local boards to give them some direction on where they can plant across their own local board areas to address the key pressures and risks that there are that we've uncovered from the 2013 information. So that may involve, we for example did surveys of all of the local board playgrounds to establish whether there were trees present or not. And in those areas where we've established where there are no trees around playgrounds, we've highlighted that as a priority for the local board to consider in terms of funding planting new trees. In terms of working with a range of local community and stakeholders, we've worked with local nurseries, and obviously we're looking at increasing our capacity across the areas of business. And obviously an important initiative that we've been helping to coordinate over the last 3 years is the Mayor's Million Trees initiative. That's very helpful from a perspective that most of the planting is going on at pace and at scale in the south. And so those sorts of mass plantings into the future will provide us with positive benefits in the sense that we can grow the tree cover in the south at a faster rate by planting over larger areas. One of the other benefits that come from that, and I think it's one to give Mayor Phil some credit for, is that we have now formed an allegiance with Corrections Department, and so we have corrections now growing plants for us that we can plant into public open spaces. And I think it's a very valuable point to recognise that some of these people that are working in the prison for us are significant criminals, and some of the work that they do in terms of this is rehabilitation. I think that's an important link to show that these guys are very proud of what they grow. They may never get out, but they're very glad to hear that we're planting more trees in areas that need it in the south. So in terms of the protection, Council, as was noted this morning by Mels Barton, is currently going through a plan change to basically fix up the Schedule 10, so that's the notable tree list. It's been noted that there were a number of errors on that list, and some of those are obviously important that we recognise. They were simply, in some cases, some were spelling. In others, they were a little bit more serious in the sense that the address was potentially wrong or the lot number was wrong, and even down to the fact of which of the trees on the site was noted as being a notable tree has been unclear on time. So that piece of work, although it may only be fixing up the errors, is very important in the sense that we get a much better understanding and a much better accuracy of where the actual notable tree is located on the site. So that's a real positive. In terms of the other areas of work that we're doing in the protection, obviously we're promoting a number of different programs out there through schools. There's the Enviro Schools program. We also have programs through the botanical gardens that put out detail around the value of trees, the benefits of them. They have what's called the Star Performers, which gives our customers guidance on what is the right tree for the right place for them to plant in their own backyard. So things like that, we actually are raising the public awareness. Obviously, we see some negative reports around tree losses, but there are also some positive things that we're doing within Council's business.
And we just wanted to finish on one piece of recognition. Last year, Auckland Council was invited to put an entry, a nomination forward for the Tree City of the World program. This is an inaugural program. There are now 59 cities registered. They've met the grade, and Auckland was successful in meeting the grade. It is a reflection on a very professional list of criteria around urban ngahere management. So it is a direct reflection on what the council is doing in terms of its end-to-end approach to urban ngahere management. So we thought that was a good place to finish, and we're happy to answer any questions.
If I could take the opportunity to thank my colleagues behind me. We have Grant Lawrence, Setsi Buma, and Matthew Blakey, who have been very instrumental in helping us develop up to this point. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. It's very comprehensive, and there's a lot of work that's going on, and a lot more over the last little while that I've learnt that is going on that I had hoped was going on, and it already is. So it's for me, we need to be promoting more of the work we're doing, and we've discussed that with Hal the other day of how we can get more of that kind of information, the process from seedling to planting, all that kind of thing out to elected members, but also the public, because it is exciting. Even the examples of the nurseries in the prison and that sort of thing, that is really creative ideas that are going on. We've got some questions. Councillor Walker.
Got a few questions. The first one's around the Biotree app. It's really great. Given that you've obviously invested some time and effort in that app, could it be applicable to trees on private property?
Yes, it can.
Okay, so I just want to capture that. The answer is yes. I guess the further question to that is what would it take to actually morph it, make it available? And I don't necessarily need that answer right now, but I'd suggest it's the sort of project that could feed into the long-term plan discussion if you need some funding around it. Okay. The other question I've got really just goes to the circumstance going forward, which is based on my observation that as much in all as the LiDAR might show some canopy, the nature of the trees that make up that canopy, I would suggest, is becoming ever poorer. And certainly the other comment that I would like you to maybe make some comment around is on the smaller properties, you can hardly fit a tree, something that I would actually call a tree as compared to a shrub. And generally, they're not trees of any long-lasting nature. They're rather temporary. So have you had a look at what the nature of the landscape is that our city is turning into in these intensively subdivided areas and so on as compared to the Auckland of the past? And are there any snapshots you've done?
I'll start with through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start with a general comment and how can further it. As we all know, our city is growing. It's been growing tremendously fast, 2 to 3% growth per annum for a number of years. One of the consequences of that intensification is there's less space for urban greenery and urban green infrastructure. So what we're doing on public land becomes very important. Over the last few years, there has been a huge amount of planting on public land. However, our LiDAR analysis at this stage doesn't pick up anything under 3 metres in height. So we have a whole lot of biomass, a whole lot of green infrastructure that will shortly register in the next LiDAR analysis. So the more we continue to focus on directly what we can control and how we can influence plantings on public land and create, future and enlarged forests, the better off we will be in the long term. But I think, to your point, Councillor Walker, the analysis is showing there is a loss of mature tree cover, particularly from private property, and perhaps that is not to be unexpected in the current growth climate where there are no regulatory controls over many trees.
The other question I've got is, there are programs, for example, there's one that that organisation I mentioned, ICLEI, runs, Cities with Nature, that cities can participate, engage and benchmark themselves. I mean, do we consider collaborating with other cities? I mean, Barcelona's involved with that, for example. There are cities that are doing pretty good stuff around trees.
So I can talk to the collaboration. I'm involved with Christchurch City Council, Wellington City Council and Canterbury University at the moment on the National iTree programme, which is looking at bringing a software programme to New Zealand to make it New Zealand centric, which will enable us to calculate the values and benefits of trees within urban spaces. So there is collaboration going on. I personally speak at a number of conferences through my association with the Arb Association. I've presented on a number of different aspects around greening, and I provide both professional and personal advice to other I guess colleagues around the country on what works for us, and try and help them to improve in their cases as well. So Collaboration is certainly there, yes.
Goes to these trees that Mel's Barton and others have identified. These are the really special trees around Auckland. They might be old putakawas, old pecans or the like. A number of them aren't on the scheduled tree register for one reason or not, so they're not protected. Are we actively monitoring what's happening to those trees, particularly given that they're probably irreplaceable? These are the special trees, the icons that stand out in the landscape when you drive around.
Through Mr Chair, there's no special monitoring of trees that are not on a scheduled tree register or generally protected in some way, other than what we're able to pick up when we do this type of LiDAR analysis survey about looking at what's happening to urban tree canopy cover across the region.
I guess the question I'd ask around that then is, do you think that's something that's important so that, you know, we actually have identified those trees? They might not be notable trees or the like, but we actually know they're there, and then we can track what the loss is.
Through Mr Chair, as I said, unless there is a unitary plan control, and there are several controls that are in place around significant ecological areas, you know, and scheduled sites and individual trees. Other than that, there would be no proactive council monitoring of what's happening with individual trees on private land.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. The green leafy suburbs of Ōrākei don't look as if they're that green and leafy, to be honest. But look, I've got two questions. One, how much does the business case cost? Because I'd like to know, and I want to have the dollar figure, because, you know, like they're, you know, and where is it, what budget? Because I want to support the business case, but I kind of know when you're going to do it. Is it this year? Because I don't think we've got any money to do it, but I just want to know where you think you've got to find it and how much it is. That's my first question. That's probably the biggest question. So let's deal with that one first.
So through Mr Chair, it's quite good following the previous item on your agenda, because one of the key strands of the climate plan is the natural environment. And so what we would be developing is a coordinated input into long-term plan climate pathway channel, so that we're looking at all strands of this policy and where we can help advance it. And that would include what we can put in the ground. It would include how we look at mechanisms to protect trees. So it's not costed at this stage, and that's why we're, I guess, seeking approval in principle to advance that, so that we're able to be well prepared for long-term plan consideration.
Yeah, I might just look around sort of with your B, because I just need some clarity around that. But my second, sorry.
Maybe clarify? I think not what the cost of the budgets that come out of the business case. I think what Councillor Simpson is saying, what is the cost of preparing
The business, yes,
the business
because it
case?
says support the preparation of the business case. Yeah.
Is that part of our normal work program?
Oh, you don't need a cost.
It's internal, so we would be doing
No
the work
cost.
ourselves.
Okay, that's really important to note, thank you, for me. And this, my second question, forgive me for being a little bit specific here, and I just want to understand exactly what you're saying. So, is a hectare a rugby field in round figures,
Equivalent,
right?
roughly,
Okay.
yes.
So if I look at your chart on page 214 of the agenda, sorry, I'm not sure, under the tree canopy cover change between 2013 and 16-18. I'm looking at Ōrākei, right? And its percentage was 20% in 2013, 20% in 2016-18. But the net change is 18 hectares. Just kind of understand, just take me through that change, because obviously the difference in canopy cover, 0.6% and 3% up from 2013, but the figures are the same. So is it factually accurate to say that Ōrākei has had 18 hectares more of canopy cover, even though we've still ended up with 20 because we've lost some and gained stuff? I just don't understand that chart.
Grant?
or our specialist.
Sorry, I'm trying to tell a good story, but I
No,
just,
it's a good story.
you know, if the number is the same, how come we've gone up?
Cool. Hi there. Yeah, so in that left-hand column, you've got canopy cover as a percentage for 2013, and then the column right to the right as a percentage for 2016-18. So those are two percentage columns, and then the 18 you're referring to is a hectare, so that's an area value. Yeah.
So that bit changed there.
So what you're saying is, forget percentages, you're saying that Ōrākei has increased 18 hectares since 2013.
Correct.
Yes.
Those are the lines you use. The good news story is to use the hectare line, right, to get percentages.
Yes.
But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to change the percentage. Like the overall city went up 60 hectares, but it only changed 0.1%. So it's quite. You'd require much higher numbers.
Yeah, so I won't speak, but I'll just say it's kind of okay news. It's not good. Sadly, I don't think it's as good as it could be, unfortunately, even though it tells quite a reasonable story, you know, because, yeah, trees are the lungs of a city. And so thank you for the work that you've done, but I think we all want to do a bit better. Thank you.
So I think it is an important question, Mr Chairman. Councillor Simpson, you can see those changes, negative and positive, throughout local boards throughout the region, with an overall increase of 60 hectares of canopy coverage.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A question and a follow-up, and I reserve my right to speak. How are local boards empowered to commit to planting programs and to nominate public land within their board areas for the purpose? How are local boards empowered to commit to planting programs and nominate public land within their local board areas for the purpose?
Knowing growing.
So, as you're aware, we've gone through the knowing phase, and so we've provided information to the local boards to highlight where the areas of lower tree canopy cover are, also highlight the areas of where there are no trees within public open spaces. In terms of empowering the local board for planting going forward, that's where we're currently working with the local boards at the moment to seek their feedback directly on where they would like us to see effort made over the next few years. And all we're doing is basically coming up with a priority listing for them, and so giving them areas that we consider to be a higher priority, and then leaving them make the decisions in terms of what they believe is necessary in their local area.
Thank you for that. Just coming from being previously a local board chair, I mean, we can all identify lots of scraps of land and little reserves that have pretty much not much use, that could very easily be planted out. Hey. Very easily planted out with trees. So just interested in how local boards would go about navigating this through the strategy to go and get that done. Thanks. Don't know if that's a question.
Quite simply, Mr Chairman, through you. So the growing plans that Hal is talking about will identify those opportunities and a program of work so that they can be planted up. Often, and it is important to acknowledge that communities are engaged in this planting, so volunteers. So we really are starting to see some ownership from those communities, often tamariki, so young people, which may be part of the protection strategy as well, to get knowledge and understanding and ownership of those important areas of our city.
So sorry, I'll do one more follow-up. Rather than speak about it, I'll just ask the question. Have we looked at a landmark planting that could get people's attention, much like anyone that's been to Berlin knows about Black Forest, massive forest in the middle of the city? Have we considered a massive scale planting program that can really bring people to the attention of the issue in Auckland?
Through you, Mr Chair, we have significant hectareage in our parks open space estate, 40,000 hectares of regional parkland and 10,000 hectares of community parkland. So at the moment, there are multiple opportunities across that estate to engage with the community, and we have a huge amount of community interest. So rather than try and focus on one significant event, we have a huge amount of the community really interested in just advancing things on a local level. So cumulatively, we aggregate the benefits from that. A point to remember too is that when we're talking about the LIDAR analysis, we're talking about 16 urban local boards. So we're excluding the Waitakere Ranges, Franklin and Rodney, and the Gulf Islands from that. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I was gonna say that that to make sure that when we're talking about this, that we are talking, even when we're talking about those really tall trees, we are not. It's only the urban areas. We're not including Waitakere at all, Hunua, all those areas. So it's not as bleak as it might seem as a whole city. But if we're talking urban trees, that's a major issue. Councillor Coon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the presentation and bringing us the report. You always know it's an important day when Hal has his tie on. I just have a couple of questions. One's kind of a bit more technical and one's a bit of a bigger picture. But in terms of the report at paragraph 58, it talks in 57, it talks about Auckland Transport. I would add the words belatedly recognising the importance of incorporating environmental systems into planning for new roads and incorporating trees. But one of the, that's great for new roads, but I know from a local board perspective, there's been a lot of effort put into actually getting Auckland Transport to consider planting opportunities as part of renewals. And of course, we've had quite a lot of debate about how we can leverage renewals from our budget and make the most of our shrinking budgets. So I just wondered where that conversation was at. I know that Waitemata was meant to be trialled for a new approach to renewals because it was just immense frustration that the local board had budget to contribute and Auckland Transport was just an absolute no to including trees. So any update on that? And is that something that we can look at including in the business case?
I can speak to that, Pippa. Yes, Auckland Transport, as you rightly point out, there's been some issues around getting them to look at tree planting within the road corridor. It's been a significant piece of work for us to get to the point of having them included in their roads and streets framework, which is both looking at new and where they're renewing. So that's an important thing to realise. The other aspect is that, as you're aware, we're working with the central area team on developing up a number of areas to plant trees through their renewal programme. That's been impacted, unfortunately, by the emergency budget and the COVID crisis, but our intention is that going forward, that yes, we will be looking to plant more trees within the road corridor, working with our colleagues at Auckland Transport. And we have actually taken the step now to reach further through the development of these growing plans to look at the road corridor maintenance staff in other areas of the region and not just the central.
That's good to hear. Thank you. And if I have another question. Councillor Simpson reminded me of this question because in terms of what is the good news story, and my understanding from looking at the LIDAR, the mapping work, that this is on balance. I mean, we have heard that we've got a real deficit of oversized trees, but in terms of the canopy spread and the fact that it has been an increase, is it right to say, I mean, a few years ago, there were headlines that there's been a chainsaw massacre across Auckland, and I guess as one of the elected representatives that was getting a lot of flack around, that I was solely responsible for chopping down a lot of these trees, apparently. I'd like to know from an officer perspective, how is this a good news story, and or where are the concerns in terms of what that LIDAR mapping has told us?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think there is a good news story here, and that is that across the region we're holding our own at present. It could be worse. So everything that is happening across the council family at the moment means we're holding our own in terms of urban tree canopy cover, yet the city is growing at an exponential rate. Can we do better is a good question, and so that's something that we'd like to come back with some more information around and further options. Do we have geographic disparities? Yes. So are those areas to focus on? Yes, and that's where we're working closely with a number of local boards to identify the opportunities and look at how we can make a difference there.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Mayor Goff.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The number of questions. The first, if I look at Mangere Otahuhu, 8% canopy, and then Otara Papatoetoe, 9%. They haven't changed in 5 years, and in fact, in terms of hectares, that's been where the most savage reduction in tree cover apparently has taken place. What specifically are we doing in those two areas that are barely half of the minimum canopy level that we would require for any board area?
Through the chair, we've developed our knowing and growing plans. The growing plans give a lot more direction and positive direction to the local boards on where they should be focusing their efforts. Both the Otara Papatoe and Mangere Otahuhu local boards have been very supportive of the Ngāhere growing programme, and our intention is that we continue to try and help support them as much as possible. A positive note, I guess some of the losses that we see in the south in these specific areas are in some cases related to development that's going on private land with Whānau Ora. Whānau Ora has recently got in touch with myself and Matthew and Setsi in the Urban Forest team to talk about what they can do to work with us as Auckland Council to, I guess, turn around the perception that their development sites are all scorched earth. And some of the positives that we see from that is that at least they're now willing to have a conversation with us around what they can do to develop these areas without necessarily removing all of the trees. Because we've pointed out to them that their work is actually having an impact, a negative impact on the tree cover in these areas.
Yeah, I'm still kind of, I know both areas quite well, and I don't see a heck of a lot of evidence anywhere of tree planting. So we're not making progress, obviously, in the canopy protection. We're losing some through infill housing, I understand that. But if we're really worried about these which are socioeconomically deprived, but also tree deprived, you'd think that we'd be putting a really special effort into those areas, and I just don't see it. So I'm still looking for reassurance, I guess, about what we've got planned to do to bring these suburbs up at least into double figures. For God's sake, it's pretty poor, and it's been that way for a decade. So. What assurance can you give me that this is happening and that we've got a special program targeted at these areas? Because that's what I think we need.
In terms of assurance, Your Worship, we with those growing plans, we will be targeting these areas of lower canopy coverage, and certainly with the Million Trees program, that's where we're putting some of that emphasis into those areas where we can make a real difference to get to a canopy coverage that is reasonable. One of the challenges in this, what the data is showing you, there is a bit of a lag between planting and getting trees to that 3 metre height. So we will be able to show to you what we have planted and what we might expect in future years as well. But your point's well taken in terms of dealing with those areas of equity, or inequity rather.
Thank you. If you can provide us, I think, with the plans for those two areas, because I get questions periodically and I'm struggling to find an answer when I look at the figures. The second thing picks up Pippa Coombs' question about streetscaping, and I know Auckland Transport had some resistance to it, and I know, I get letters from some streets saying we've got these trees and they've got leaves in the gutter. Fancy that, autumn, the leaves fall off the tree and they fall into the gutter. But again, just, if you look at the really special parts of the streets, I'm thinking of Simon Street and Princess Street around the university, where the tree cover actually creates the atmosphere of the street. Whereabouts are we doing that sort of stuff? Where are we planting on the streets? Where are the new areas that we're focusing on?
Through Mr. Chair, all the greenfield developments around the city, there is landscaping and tree provision as part of that. So often that is negotiated with council in terms of the planning of the whole subdivision. So we inherit green assets, so that's a win again. In terms of infill planting opportunities in the street environment, our data systems will tell us at the moment we have around 330,000 street trees, and on average we're renewing around 1% of that asset every year. So that's natural tree decline, and there's a conscious program of replacing. So we're not going backwards in terms of maintaining that tree asset. And over the last couple of decades, there have been small local efforts to infill where there are gaps. But often what we're left with are now really difficult planting sites that may cost a lot of money. They may not support good tree outcomes. So in some cases, it's just not worth the effort to try and revegetate a street if it's not conducive to tree planting, and our effort is better put into a local reserve, say, for example. So working with the local boards on these knowing and growing plans, all of those opportunities are identified and assessed and recommendations are made. One of the most important outcomes is that we're choosing the right tree to plant in the right place, so that we're creating the right legacy going forward. And if that sometimes means less trees for larger scale and enhanced environmental benefits, then that's a win rather than a whole lot of small trees. So it's quite a considered approach, and we've got really good data informing that now. So I think with the resource we have, we're able to now really start focusing where we put that effort.
Thank you. Last two questions, Mr. Chair. I wanted to pick up Hal's point about corrections, and I've been out at Paremaremo, and they really do. It's a meaningful thing for them to do, and they enjoy doing that. How many trees are corrections preparing for us in each year in this triennium?
As I understand it at the moment, we've got a memorandum of understanding to grow 60,000 plants for us in this coming year. And in following years, any idea? We're going to have discussions with them. We're probably looking at somewhere in the region of 100,000 plus, I would imagine. Okay, that's very good. Thank you very much. My last question is from the session this morning, and I've got to say I feel really uncomfortable about watching those Canal Street trees come down. They're beautiful trees. I was told that it costs $1,500 to schedule a tree, and that's a bit mind-blowing to me. I could use the back of a piece of paper and I could write down about 100 trees that are significant trees for you, both in terms of their scale and the nature of the tree. I'm really reluctant to go out and use that as an excuse for why we don't schedule more trees, but what comfort can you give me around the fact that we are, that we're not gold plating the way we schedule trees? Am I being incredibly naive that you can't say that's a fine tree, it's a 80-year-old totara tree and it should be preserved? I'm just wondering why that costs $1,500 to do.
Thanks. Okay. Through the Chair, Phil Reid, Auckland-wide Planning Manager, looking after the unitary plan. And yes, that number did originate from myself. You probably do need to look at the context, though, of the plan change that you're doing to actually change the schedule. From an end-to-end point of view, there'd be an archives research to start with, checking property files. There'll need to be access negotiated to properties. There'll be site visits to properties by arborists, potentially with a planner as well. Then there'll be the notification submissions that come in where there might be further submissions that challenge in relation to a tree, requiring additional time to consider the pros and cons of the entry. Then you've got the hearing costs themselves, working through decisions, and then the appeals and legal costs associated with that. So to give you a feel for that, the current plan change 29, which was being spoken about this morning. There are probably about 2,000 line items of the 3,000 line items that were adjusted by that plan change. Now, in terms of site visits by arborists and planners, it's probably in the order of a few hundred that actually needed to happen. A lot else could be done by desktop analysis. But we're yet to go to hearing. It'll be late August, early September. And we don't know the degree of difficulty that there might be after the hearing in terms of any appeals as well. So from a staff resource point of view and consultancy support, we've been working on that plan change for upward of 18 months now. And it is essentially just correcting the existing schedule and not looking to add additional items to the schedule from the nominations that we have. So when I come back to Planning Committee later this year, we can look at the bigger implications of doing a full review of the schedule, and there could well be some economies of scale that we can get from that so that it's not an extrapolation of $1,500 per tree.
Yeah, I think I'm slightly better informed, but I'm still incredulous that, look, I understand once you get into the legal debate and all that sort of stuff, it costs big money. But it might be helpful if you could give us a memo on what constitutes the costs of scheduling a tree and how that might be streamlined and reduced. Because at the moment, I'd be just scared to open my mouth and say to somebody, it costs us $1,500 to say that's a significant tree and it should be protected. It's kind of counterintuitive. I'm sure you're right in the sort of things that you've said, but I'd hate to leave that unchallenged as to, that you can't do that more quickly, more cheaply. So if you can get something that's circulated to councillors, that would be really appreciated.
I think that, through the chair, I think the other discussion which must occur whenever you face those types of questions is what other regulatory tools may exist to achieve the same outcomes or better outcomes. And that's, I think, where we need to put a lot of focus, and your letter from yesterday does help in that way. The cost effectiveness aspect of general tree protection can be a lot more effective and efficient than notable trees and leverage an outcome which is a far better outcome.
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate that, and that was the answer we gave to Mel's Barton this morning. But I don't think anybody around the table feels particularly easy about the fact that these trees have been lost when they were beautiful trees, and that's a real pity. Thank you.
The other issue is, Phil, that the fact is we don't have general tree protection in the RMA, so the only way we can protect any tree is a plan change, effectively. And we just do it as a group of trees as a plan change,
yes,
right?
We are limited, you're right.
So we couldn't...
That's why I'm suggesting to come back later this year with a report on a full review of the notable tree schedule, because we may well have a bit more of a steer from central government about what tools are in the toolbox for us.
Cool. That'd be good.
I've just returned from supporting them for 9 months on the review of the RMA.
And a few of the local boards and also Councillor Coombe found there is an issue with what we say on our council website about, putting in a tree to be scheduled on a list that may be used in a future date. I think we just need to make it a bit clearer there that either we don't hold those trees forever, or so we don't make it look like there's a process, because there isn't currently one right now.
I'll make sure the report addresses that.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Cooper, thank you.
Thank you. I thought there was a question in there too, through Mr. Chairman, Phil, around once you do schedule all those trees, that it's like painting the harbour bridge. You get to one end and then the beginning is changed again, and so you're never going to get a comprehensive scheduling. That's the difficulty, especially while the RMA hasn't changed. You could do that, it might take you several years, and they've already been cut down before you get to the end, so that it's a really gnarly process. So my other questions are around, because we haven't got Rodney, Franklin and Waitakere Ranges in here, but we have significant new urban areas in those wards or local board areas. And that's what worries me. You've got Glen Eden, which has been urban for decades, but we don't count it because it's in the Waitakere Ranges local board area. It's quite urban, quite a big chunk of it is. So there's that we don't count, and we don't know if it's getting lost or found. Same with Kumiu Huapai. That's massively changed. I mean, a lot of it would have been farmland, but I'm just wondering how we're going to look at that. And things like Drury, Pukekohe, Franklin, where we know we've got live urban areas and future urban, what's the strategy? Because it looks like it could end up being ignored over years rather than being pulled in. So I just wondered how we were going to address that, or is that too soon?
Through Mr. Chair, we are actually now analysing the areas of urban tree cover outside of the mule, so we are looking at the overall region rather than just what's inside the metropolitan urban limits.
Right.
So we will be able to provide further detail in an update on what those canopy coverages look like for those more rural areas, as you say, that are experiencing rapid growth.
Thank you.
Great question, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thank you. I've been listening to the responses to Councillor Henderson and to the Mayor on local board issues. There's just one on my list that hasn't been covered yet. 12 local boards have growing action plans. That means there's at least 4 or 5 holdouts. What's not to love about this job? What's not to love? Why?
Yeah, I guess it's that's over to individual local boards whether they want to fund the work that we do. We've been to all 21, and of that 21 we had 12 to start. We've now got 15, so hopefully over time the message will get through to other local boards and that they will then pick that up as well. I think some of the perceptions is that they, some of the Rodneys and Franklin, for example, consider themselves more rural than they do consider urban. And so when we talk about the urban Ngāhere, they don't seem to see that applying to them so specifically.
That's all, Councillor. Councillor Dalton. Still there?
Thank you. Yes, I'm here. My question was with regard to perhaps it's around kāinga ora now that I've been listening. I guess we're limited in terms of what impact that we can have on private properties, and I respect that, but the unitary plan has enabled this intensification. And I was wondering if there was any type of policy response, and I'm not talking about tree scheduling, but just in terms of the devastation that is happening when you're sitting in the middle of the red zone out here, in terms of particularly the broadness of the kāinga ora development. We're home to thousands and thousands and thousands of homes that are replacing hundreds of homes, and with that the trees are gone. My question I think is, well, is there a policy response to private development in general? And secondly, I would really like us to form a stronger relationship with kāinga ora, and it's not necessarily limited to trees. I've contacted Claudia around a response to some of the community issues we have, but I think that we need a stronger working relationship with kāinga ora, and perhaps this is a place that we can do that as well. Did you get a question out of that? That might have been a bit muddled. Is there a policy response? Is there a policy response to private property?
Through the Chair, Councillor Bartley, Phil Reid here. There are probably a couple of angles to that. The unitary plan is essentially enabling of people to make choices for themselves about the type of tree and the position that they may wish to plant it on their own property. But there is a policy implication about the availability of land on a property to be able to do just that. One of the things that we're looking at, and there have been workshops which are starting with Planning Committee, are the residential issues that we're finding with the performance of the unitary plan. And one of the issues that we're looking at is the performance of some of our bulk and location controls, particularly things such as our outdoor living court controls. And whether or not those outdoor living courts are achieving the purpose that they're there for. And the purpose of those outdoor living courts goes beyond just the human use. There's also an aspect to outdoor living courts of being able to be used for people to make choices, to be able to plant the right sort of tree in the right sort of location. So we will need to look at that, and there will be workshops with Planning Committee where we do look at balancing or reconciling some of those competing interests around the provision of capacity, affordability and housing with some of the amenity issues that we desire from our neighbourhoods.
I think Councillor Dalton just...
Sorry, I was just going to say that was a very good response, thank you, just in terms of looking at the impacts of the unitary plan on intensification and amenity for families and for growing trees. Thank you.
The second part of your question, Councillor Dalton, Mace Ward here, is that yes, we are developing strong relationships with Kāinga Ora and other developers to seek the best outcome we can for those developments in terms of public amenity, including tree cover and canopy.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. And I, as I've seen in Northcote, but also Barry has just said that we are doing a lot of planting with healthy waters as part of the Kāinga Ora. But I'd like to offline probably work with you if you'd like to see if we can further find out if it's right across Auckland, because I would like to think that Kāinga Ora as a public entity could be ramping up their game and we could assist them with expertise or whether it's access to planting or volunteers or whatever it is. It would be good if we could partner with them a bit more if it's not. I mean, it may be happening, but I just want to make sure it's getting to the areas or the red zones as Councillor Dalton said. So thank you. Member Wilcox.
Got a couple of questions, and first one is, so do we include mangroves in this urban bush?
Through the chair, no, we don't.
Okay, yeah, so carrying on from that, I mean, yeah, there's definitely a deficit of trees, you know, I mean, I was down Beards Road, you go around there, Dawson, there's just an absence of basically green growth. So I think there's definitely needed, and I mean, we identified the south quite a while back now. I suppose it's kind of a little bit to what Councillor Simpson was saying. I'd like to see kind of a modular approach to a business plan so that we can kind of say, well, if we don't, you know, you go in there and it's 100 million and it, you know, how the horse trading goes and all these things. And so I'd rather we had a really good approach where we actually made it than tried to spread it over the whole of Auckland. $1 million over the whole of Auckland goes nowhere, but you know, $1 million would work in Dawson Road and Beards. You know, so I think I'd like to see a kind of a modular approach to the way you do this business plan, and then we could kind of, you know, decide then at that point, you know, where are we really aiming for and what we can do. So that's just my comments, and really I don't know if there's a question there. My question was about the mangroves more than anything else. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Wilcox. Councillor Simpson, did you have another question?
Sorry, just a follow-up, and the Mayor prompted me. When you're looking at the non-funded business case, I'll keep saying that because I've been told by finance, don't ever agree to anything in a recommendation unless... Okay. I'm looking at street cleaning. So can you talk to the street cleaning people? Because, or do we have a policy that goes for evergreen? It's just that if we are going to look after our gutters and our cesspits with trees, I mean, I want the trees to happen. I think that's the purpose of this paper, and I think that's really positive. But if we're looking at, berm planting or things that are directly trees that are planted, close to the road, and you're talking over 3 metre, talking significant trees, potentially that will require a higher level of street maintenance. So I just want the right hand and the left hand to talk to each other, all right? So the level of service should be that the leaves are picked up, I don't want to hand another thing back to the ratepayer like we did with berms, that, we do all the right thing, but you have to look after it kind of style. I appreciate there can be a bit of that, but I just think that you need to talk across council family.
Yeah, and I know we are definitely already doing that work. If you find the memo we sent out on the strategic approach to planting on the 9th of July, right in the middle of a little bit busy, Councillor Simpson, but there is a bit of information there on the strategic approach across, with the whole council family working together, making sure it's the right place, the right purpose, much better than I think we were doing a few years ago, so that's really good. But I think my opinion is that I'm learning a lot more, so I think potentially there's an opportunity for a workshop later in the year or something to really nut this out and see what's actually happening on the ground, maybe with more images and different opportunities of what we're seeing. Not just the Mayor's Million Trees, but there's a lot of other things going on that potentially we aren't seeing in each other's backyards. So, right, Councillor, there's no more questions? Sorry, Councillor Walker, last question.
So just picking up on the question that Councillor Cooper had, which was a good one, I was going to raise that. What's the timing on reporting on these rural areas?
Through the chair, we expect to have some further information within 2 months on the rural areas.
Great, I look forward to that, and it's particularly relevant, Mr Chair, given the tremendous loss on the Hibiscus Coast, which is adjacent to Rodney. The other question I've got just goes to, can we use this strategy to try and enable berm planting that people are having great difficulty with regarding Auckland Transport? I mean, given that council strategies and policies overlay the CCOs, do we need something specific about enabling berm planting? And if so, can you add it?
Through Mr Chairman, thanks Councillor Walker for the question. I think that's something we can give consideration to, but at the moment we can continue to work with Auckland Transport to look to what the benefits, those benefits are in the road corridor, and significantly, as you noticed in the report, in the presentation, 13% of our tree canopy coverage is in the road corridor, so but we can enhance that. So it's continuing to work as a council group and get collective action around these strategies.
Well, I would actually urge you to go beyond that and act as an enforcer, because they're diabolical. Okay, so I'd really like a good answer around that, because I don't think that they're going to move sufficiently. So can we do something there?
Is it not my understanding that we are now responsible for the road corridor planting, or are we only responsible for looking after it after it's planted? Oh, right. Okay.
Maintenance.
So I really haven't had an answer. I think this is pretty imperative, because there are many people out there that want to plant their berms, and for one reason or another, they're being threatened by Auckland Transport. And it's costing us, and you should hear this, Desley, it's costing us a lot of money. And all these good souls in Auckland, actually, most of them, look after our berms, and they save us millions of dollars a year.
So, Mr Chairman, we'll report back on that when we come back to the workshop and with the ability to have a discussion. But appreciate the question and the challenge.
The other observation I'll just make, Mr Chair, and Phil took me back to deja vu, I raised the issue about the imperative of having locations to plant trees during the unitary plan, but the officers told me it's not a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. We've finished our questions and we have Councillor Pipicum, Deputy Chair, would like to move.
Yes, please,
I'm happy
Mr.
to
Chair.
second. Happy to second. Councillor Walker can second.
May I speak in support? Fabulous. So I would like to commend these recommendations, including the additions of C and D, and thank you for the progress report on the Ngāhere strategy. That's a bit of work that was done before my time on the governing body, but very much support it, and particularly that we've received the LiDAR mapping work, and I've got history, of course, as Hal well knows, with that work going back some time, because it was, I have to mention, the fabulous Waitemata local board, again another plug, that it was funding that the local board first came up with that initially kicked off that survey work back in 2013, I think it was, which, if I'm correct, has led to this far fuller body of surveying and understanding the canopy across Auckland from that work. And also I'm glad, I think in the progress report, you've also mentioned that the local board was the first to have a localised urban Ngāhere strategy for the local board, and so it's great to see that other boards are following behind on that, and hopefully we can get all the boards signing up. And thank you, I have to give a special thanks to Hal, because we worked frantically in the dying days of the last term to get that report, that plan onto the agenda and signed off by the board. So it was only through Hal really going above and beyond that we were able to make that happen. So thank you for that, and thank you for everybody who has worked on that, on the progress report. In terms of the business case, I'm very excited to see the word accelerate implementation of the strategy, and we don't often see that in our planning, in our implementation for the work around council. So that would be fantastic if we can bring some urgency to this work, because I know that there's real concern right across Auckland about the loss of trees, but also whether we're doing enough to get trees in the ground. But thanks to like the Mayor's Million Tree project, and now the government also committing to the Billion Tree program, I mean, there is some fantastic work that's happening around the region, and I was fortunate to be able to join Ngā Taiki Tamaki on Sunday. There was quite a few council people there and representatives from DOC and Ministry of Forestry, and who had all come together. It's a partnership with the iwi to start doing the planting on Motutapu as part of that Billion Tree program. So heaps of work, and it's fantastic too that we've now got the tools to be able to document where that planting is happening. So absolutely support us progressing the work that we can do. And a big focus in my area, particularly in the city side of my ward, is the need to get trees planted in the road corridor. It's been a massive, massive struggle, but we absolutely have to make that a priority. Not many people know that the city centre master plan actually has a target of increasing cover by 25% in the city centre. That's in the city centre master plan, and that was actually met, but only because so many trees have gone into Wynyard Quarter. If that hadn't been happening, we would have really struggled to have met that target. And it's been immense frustration that Auckland Transport have just had a real blind spot when it comes to street trees. And as we know, which brings me on to the scheduling of trees, is that we have, there has been a huge loss on private land. I think we heard that 60% of tree canopy is on private land, and the rules being changed back in 2009 did open up the door to a huge amount of tree loss, and I know it's affecting people, particularly in the central parts of Auckland, where big, massive trees are being felled for really no reason other than the fact that homeowners can do it, and they're worried that the rules might change. So I would like to acknowledge the Puki Te Papa local board members, John, who was here before, and his colleague Bobby Shen, because they tried to schedule a notable tree in Puki Te Papa and discovered that the process is on hold, and what's on our website says, hey, tell us your notable trees and we'll schedule them, without pointing out the fact that it just goes into a bottom drawer and no one's actually acting on it. So I'm glad that we can just at least acknowledge there's work that needs to be undertaken. I know this isn't going to get us scheduling a new lot of trees, but at least it acknowledges where we're at. And then finally, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Chair, for again corresponding with the government on the issue for the need to reinstate some protection in the RMA. I know it's not a silver bullet, but when we look at Canal Road, and I haven't been involved in that issue, but seeing how those trees were literally being felled as we were hearing from Dr. Barton this morning, and the fact that those trees unfortunately probably have gone, if only we had been able to schedule them, it would probably have been a development site that would have been developed around those trees. So we've kind of got ourselves in a real pickle looking at turning it into reserve or land swaps, when really it could have been quite a simple process, but that's where we got to the real pointy end of those changes, so it's unfortunate. So hopefully the incoming government will fix that one, and we don't want to go back to where it was very, very difficult to cut trees, but at least we need to have some proper protection that provides a balance. So I think that's got us to a good place in terms of where we are in receiving this report and the next steps. Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me move that motion.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Councillor Walker?
Sure, so I'm happy to second this. I'm sure if Jim Holdaway and Professor Morton and others that I used to work with that helped get the Tree Council going and the like were here, they'd be happy with this. But equally, they'd be very, very disappointed with what they're seeing that's happening to their Auckland. And these were pretty esteemed, very, very knowledgeable people. So in moving this or seconding this, implicit in B is my understanding that these suggestions that have been put up around extending the Biotree app, having a more directive stance, using this strategy to enable berm planting, the work that needs to be done on the unity plan that Phil is working on, conceivably joining with other cities and cities with nature and the like, are going to happen, because we need to be doing everything and collaborating with as many people as we can to save our trees, because they're not going to be around otherwise, and Auckland will be all the poorer for it.
Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. Look, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, look, I wasn't going to speak on this, but just, look, in supporting, in receiving this report and wanting to see more trees planted on council-owned land, I'd make the comment, and I think it's a fair comment to make, and I really wish that I was there today, cold notwithstanding, just in relation to this particular item, because increasing tree protection under the Resource Management Act, balancing that out, that is also about affecting the rights of private property owners, including the rights of property owners to fell trees on their land. And some of us, well, I'm one of them at least, believe that those private property rights are really, really important. And whilst it offends me to see some mature trees felled, if I don't own the property and I'm not paying the property rates on that property, if I didn't take on the cost of purchasing the land, whilst it might offend me personally, there is a limit to my ability to require protection for the trees on that private property. So I think the real challenge here is for council to address what it can do in relation to council land, and to increase the tree canopy by planting on council land is more important in my view than changing the Resource Management Act, even though one of the consequences of the Resource Management Act changes that were implemented, and they haven't been repealed, has been that there have been trees that were felled. Look, there is a tree protection in relation to Hill Park and in the ward that I represent and Councillor Dalton represents. That has saved some trees, but that is the exception rather than the rule. And even in Hill Park, there are people who would actually like that overlay to be removed. So I'd make the point that not all of us necessarily believe that the Resource Management Act needs to change, because it is a case of balancing the desire to have the trees against the right of property owners to exercise franchise in relation to the land that they've purchased. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Good points. Councillor Darby, last speaker.
Yeah, I have a question actually. I've been listening to this twos and frozen questions and comments. How is this a progress report on the implementation of the strategy when we've only limited the discussion to trees? And that's my understanding of not what the strategy is about. It's not limited to trees. So it doesn't, the LiDAR, the focus of today is a report on LiDAR. That doesn't pick up anything under 3 metres, correct? That's what I've heard. So what about the other vegetation that is mentioned in the strategy? So how do we pick that up? How do we pick up the stream edge vegetation, the wetland vegetation, and a whole lot of categories that are in the definition under the Ngāhere strategy, but aren't being reflected on here today? And why is it we're only talking about trees?
I mean, yeah, I think we might be past questions, but if Mark, you could just have a brief.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Urban Ngāhere strategy is all about Ngāhere and a flourishing, diverse environment, natural environment across the region. Many of the outcome areas and the actions are focused on what is happening with trees. So there is quite a lot of content that we've reported back on, which is advancing how trees are cared for, how they're managed, how they're protected. So the strategy is pitched at that level, but it has a holistic view of everything green infrastructure. But it's perhaps skewed or slanted more towards trees and how we're managing trees per se.
Yeah, and I can see that from reading the strategy too, but it's interesting that the introduction to the strategy, it actually says that it's more than that, yet as you read into the strategy, it just narrows down. And so I guess my question is, we know that New Zealand's lost 95% of its wetlands, I think, and in Auckland we've probably lost more than that, in the Auckland region. So where do we bring the attention to the other vegetation, which is an additional to trees? Where do we record the health of that?
So, through the Chair, in terms of recording where we plant, obviously the BioTree app now gives us a lot more of a broader picture. It doesn't just record trees, it records all of our plantings, so it's both herbaceous and flaxes, etc. In terms of the, I guess the other aspects of the non-tree cover, if we want to call it that, but the green assets, certainly in my area of work, green infrastructure is something that we encourage, certainly through development. You'll see a lot more rain gardens. Stormwater treatment devices are being now incorporated into the road corridor. They in themselves lead to more plantings, and so in our discussions that we're having with developers, it's about not just about the trees, because in some cases we can't plant trees in streets. It's about us getting in green infrastructure as well to help with that overall, I guess, improvement of the environment by looking at planting as one of the solutions.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Just briefly, I guess I took it for granted living in growing up in Glenfield and Kaipātiki that we have 32% tree coverage. The air was obviously cleaner for me. The streets were cooler. Walking to school, I walked through 2 or 3 bush tracks on the way to school when I was a kid. It just didn't occur to me until I worked as a youth worker right across Auckland how different the service trees give, especially into South Auckland schools where I'm working, where it is hotter, it is dustier, the air quality is different. You can tell it is different, and that's specifically because I guess people in decades before had saved so much reserve land in my area, but also the tree planting, well-established suburbs, things like that. But we cannot turn our back on those communities now, and I'm glad that's where the focus is already going. But the business case must ramp up that work in those areas. South Auckland needs to get more trees and more stormwater. The issues around flooding, the stormwater, all the co-benefits that come from tree planting, the reducing emissions, the air quality, the amenity, just the fact it's more enjoyable to have trees around your neighbourhoods. That cannot just be continuing to be places like Kaipātiki where we're already blessed. So it is about holding the line. It's great that the LiDAR shows that we are holding our line, but we know there is a constant reduction in the larger trees which we need to address. I'm excited about this. It's important. We are doing big space. Barry's just got me 162 trees are going into the downtown, Quay Street. Those big projects are fantastic in the city centre, but it shows us the Te Ounga, Oakley Creek work, Awataha with Healthy Waters and Kāinga Ora. Those massive big projects are great, but we also need to be getting in all our communities through this urban ngāhere process. And I think, listening to Hal the last few months, I've learned more about what we are doing, and I've been far more excited about it, listening to his passion for it, but also all the work that all of you have been doing in this space, but how intertwined it is into all the different parts of council already. So it's exciting, but I think ramping up this work through a business case that is done internally, Councillor Simpson, but that can go into the 10-year budget and really actually significantly do this work and engage our communities through mana whenua, schools, community, everyone to do, to really transform Auckland, to make it cooler and reduce those emissions as well. So thank you all very much, and it has been moved and seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against?
Mr Chair,
Thank you.
how long do you think we've got to go? Because
Yes,
Shane and I have to go, and there won't be a quorum.
Yeah, so I was about to say that. So we have one item left with Linda and Shane gone. There will still be a quorum, but we'll be right on it. But we're going to try and get through this last item because I know Councillor Stewart needs to leave as well. Okay. Yeah. So yep. So we've got 15.